We are pleased to
Good
have
morning.
our two
Good morning.
renowned experts on our first Twitter, or now called X Dialogue series. As we have always done, we seek to provide a platform where ideas will flourish, inform, educate, and educate our audiences. We are doing this. On this brief note, let me welcome Professor Godfred Alufa Abokwin, Professor Economics and Finance at the University of Ghana, and Mr. Mike Kobler, my very good friend, and the Chief Executive Officer of Synergy, an investment firm with tremendous experience in banking and finance. Today's discussion centers around the mid-year budget and its implications. We will also take a sneak peek into the central bank's declared losses for last year, if time will allow us. Professor Bobbin will set the tone for this discussion by giving us his perspectives on the mid-year budget. That is the broad macroeconomic issues and what are the perspectives from his side as an economics and professor. Whilst Michael will bring his perspectives from the investments analyst view and what the mid-year budget portends for the environment. We will have time, of course, for Q&As so our audiences can engage. This whole program will... Prof, so now give us your general overview of the mid-year budget.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me to this space. I believe that we are all committed to the future of this country, and therefore we cherish such platforms where we can also put across our observations. So thank you for creating this platform. Yeah, so basically, the mid-year budget review, of course, is a fulfillment of a legal requirement, but it's also in tune with practice. Typically, assumptions held at the time we're preparing and presenting the budget in November last year, the understanding is that the assumptions will not hold consistently, and therefore, mid-year gives us the opportunity to revalidate the assumptions, calibrate the numbers, so that we all know what lies ahead of us. The mid-year review also gives the government the opportunity to update Ghanaians in terms of how the economy has performed last year. Because November last year, when we were presenting the 2023 budget, full year data was not available. But now they are in terms of the performance of the economy, measured largely by GDP, the fiscal outturn, the revenue performance, expenditure, and all of that. So then again, to also give us a perspective of how the economy has fared in the first 6 months of implementation, especially along the fiscal numbers, revenue, expenditure dynamics, and all of that. But more importantly, this is also different because this is the first major uh, review by the government since the approval of the 17th IMF supported program. And therefore, the media review also had space in there to update Ghanaians on the 17th IMF supported program, the journey so far, and then the journey ahead. Now, my considered view after reading through the media review is that 8 months ago, 8 months ago, government was more optimistic about how the economy was going to perform in 2023. But what we see in the media review is an admission that 8 months down the line, government is less optimistic now about how the economy is going to perform. And that position has informed the revision in the macro targets. So you will see that overall GDP growth was projected to be 2.8% in the 2023 budget. In the media review, we have aligned it with the IMF projection in the 17th IMF supported program. So GDP growth has been revised downwards from 2.8% to 1.5%. That is a variance of more than 46%. Okay, so this is why I'm saying that government is less optimistic now compared to 8 months ago in terms of how they felt the economy will perform. Now, and then once the implication of that is that technically the economy will be in recession this year or is in recession this year because once the rate of GDP growth is lower than rate of population growth, technically your economy is in recession in GDP per capita terms because the average GDP growth for this year 1.5%. Population is expected to grow this year by 2% or 2.2%. So that tells you that in GDP per capita terms, our economy is in recession. Then also, when you look at non-oil GDP growth, the projection in the 2023 budget was 3%. This has been revised to 1.5%. The variance there is 50%. Then when it comes to inflation, government was hoping to bring inflation down to 18.9% in the 2023 budget. At that time, we knew that wasn't possible because way back in November, inflation was trending above 40%. So now, 8 months down the line, government is now revising the year inflation target to 31.3%. The variance there is more than 65%. In terms of primary balance, again, you see that government is less optimistic compared to our position 8 months ago. And again, if you look at the performance so far, which has informed the revision in the primary balance from 0.7% to negative 0.5%, that tells you also what the outlook is. Then in terms of gross international reserves, that has also been revised from 3.3 months of imports to 0.8 months of imports. Again, you see the variance. Then you see that across the other macro numbers. So the totality of this is that, yes, with the IMF supported program, of course, latent with fiscal consolidation measures, we've seen some relative stability. But if you look at it broadly across all the macro variables, we are not out of the woods. We are not out of the woods yet. There's still a long way to go because you have to see that all the numbers have turned for positive, or they are all heading in the right direction. Then we can conclude that, yes, we have turned the corner. So we've made some progress, but of course, there's still a lot that we have to do. Now, if you see why, you realize that the IMF is projecting a lower GDP growth for 2023, and that is largely consistent with the fiscal consolidation measures that we are implementing right now. In fact, you see largely face of that in the 2023 budget, but you also get a fuller picture in the IMF supported program, the document itself. The idea is that with those level of taxes, expenditure rationalization, it would impose a cost, immediate cost, and the cost will be borne by households and private sector. And that is why the trade-off in the immediate, the trade-off will be growth. And that is why growth is projected to come down from 3.1% in 2022 to 1.5%. Of course, it's subject to revision also because it's difficult to get it exactly the case, but that is the expectation. Another way of judging how the economy is turning is to also look at the recent Monetary Policy Committee press release. Even though inflation had come down from 54.1% December 2022 to about 41.5% or so in May, we've seen that in April, we've seen that May inflation edged up slightly, and then June inflation also edged up slightly to 42.5%. The understanding then was that the country had turned the corner when it comes to price development with respect to inflation, concluding that the process of disinflation had become entrenched. But that's what we saw in May and June, perhaps is informing that broadly we need to be very careful. And that is what has informed the decision of the Central Bank Monetary Policy Committee to increase the policy rate by 50 basis points to 30%. That is a reflection that, yes, on the balance of the risk is probably towards inflation, and therefore they needed to increase the policy rate to contain the threat of inflation. Once you increase the policy rate, the trade-off is growth, because that would actually lead to higher credit. Okay, that will also squeeze credit from the market and all of that. So the trade-off will be growth, the trade-off will be employment. Government itself, in the 2023 budget, and then also consistent with the IMF supported program, is not going to hire, public sector is not going to hire that much. Actually, there will be wage freeze. And if you look at the IMF supported program, the fiscal adjustment is heavily based on revenue. So fiscal adjustment alone is expected to contribute more than 50% of that 5% of GDP fiscal savings from that adjustment, whilst expenditure is contributing just 2%. But this is what is happening with expenditure. You see that the expenditure items that have been programmed in there are actually includes limiting, containing wage bill and limiting hiring. Now, if the public sector is not going to hire, then you would expect that the growth potential should come from private sector, and that is where job creation can come. But if you see the level of taxes, in fact, since COVID came, if you look at the new taxes Ghana has introduced, an adjustment to existing tax handles, you will see that it's unbearable for private sector. That again is going to affect the ability of the private sector to expand because they will need a cash flow to expand. And once that is not available, it's going to affect growth. Now, if you also put all these things together, what is more concerning for me is that we may not be able to engineer inclusive growth that will rope in the moderate and low income earners, growth that will benefit every Ghanaian cannot be deduced from this budget and the IMF supported program. In fact, if you look at it from now to 2026, we will see some growth, but that growth will not be broad based. That growth will not be inclusive. That growth will not be able to lift majority of Ghanaians out of poverty. That growth will not be able to narrow the inequality. And I'll give you an example before I end with my initial assessment. Between 2013 and 2019, nearly 20% of our GDP growth came from mining. Meanwhile, within that same period, job creation fell. So we've seen growth, and largely it has been jobless growth. So growth that is driven by hydrocarbon production, mining, that growth is not job rich. So beyond the narrative of GDP growth, we should be talking about jobs growth. We should be talking about inclusive growth, growth that creates jobs. And those ones would come when we free up space for private sector to be able to grow, because that is where that growth will come from. Until we're able to do that, we cannot see economic transformation. We cannot see inclusive productivity growth, and that is Ghana's problem. And that is why in the last 2 decades or so, we've seen macroeconomic stability anytime we have gone to the IMF, but we have not been able to sustain it. So in essence, yes, we are seeing some stability, but it's coming at a great price to households, to private sector. And then you also see the effect of all of this also on the balance sheet of the central bank. The central bank, that is the lender of last resort, is actually in need of a bailout right now. And if you put all of that together, it tells you the recovery will be slow and it will be costly also. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. As always, being quite eloquent in these areas. Now, let me go on to Mike. Mike, can you give us your perspective from the investment side and
Um.
what this portends for the investment environment, please?
Okay. All right. So, thank you very much. Thank you for this opportunity. Generally, you realize that a number of things happened last year, which um, brought about some shock in the system. I mean, the investment world. Investments do not like uncertainty. So, if you have inconsistency in policy statements, you have haircuts and all that, it kind of drives investors away. But having said that, and like Prof had alluded, um, the shock that we went through last year is kind of stabilized, even though through this budget review, all the indicators are going down. There's some relative stability. Um, we are not going to experience the growth that we had all expected, but that is to be expected because we had gone nose down, dive nose down as an economy. So, in terms of investments, because of the relative stability that we are enjoying, we realize that investors are beginning to relook at Ghana again because for a long time people were in a wait and see environment. Obviously, the IMF effect also helps because then everybody believes that the IMF is a big brother who brings some kind of discipline. But once IMF comes in, you are also restricted in terms of the number of things that you want to do. If you look at the fiscal side, our position has always been that you cannot continue to spend more than you earn. And so we need to do something really drastic about income earning potential as a country. And unfortunately, we have resorted to taxes. And once you continue to impose taxes, the private sector then suffers. Private sector then suffers. They cannot employ. They have to cut down their costs and find other ways of surviving. So we have to find other creative ways of of making sure that we improve our revenue side, and that is not very reflective in the budget, the media review that we have seen. If you look at industry has fallen consistently over the last couple of years, and there are a couple of things. We started talking about the integrated aluminum industry. We instituted, brought in some companies that were going to look at how we can tie in our bauxite to aluminum to Valco to see how we can increase this output. Indeed, if you look at the finished products in alumina and you compare it to the raw bauxite, the difference is like heaven and hell. And so, policy initiatives aimed at making sure that we get this value chain going and then improve the revenue side in this area, something that we should be intentional about. But over the years, we kind of pay lip service to the things that we say we are going to do. Now, if you take cocoa, for instance, I mean, Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire control over 60% of the cocoa, and we have signed an agreement. We said that we are going to consistently reduce the export of raw material, cocoa, and go into the industry. Cocoa, the chocolate industry, as at the end of 2012, 2022, was about $122 billion. Okay, and if we control 60% plus of the raw material, what makes it difficult for us to be intentional about making sure that we process cocoa, get in the right infrastructure, get in the enough marketing, and export cocoa to a point that even if we got 10% of that 120 billion, that is $12 billion. It is chicken feed compared to the 3 billion we're getting from IMF. So these are the areas that I think that in terms of the real investment, we should be targeting. And so if we don't see initiatives of this nature and we keep driving the tax angle, it becomes a challenge. Now, if you look at our expenditure side, um, our government is still bloated, and we have all these fancy economic terms. We are doing food for planting, food for jobs, dam for every district, and all that. Over the last 6 years, if these initiatives have worked, our import bills would have reduced. So we have to reassess some of these policy initiatives to see if it is not working. What can we do differently? Because we cannot continue doing the same thing and expect different results. So I think we have to get real in terms of what can we actually do that will give us that quantum jump. It is not the taxes, unfortunately. We have to look at the real sectors and see what areas that we have to plug and make sure that we are able to do the value addition, look at the value chain in those areas, and be intentional about it, make the necessary investments to be able to reap the benefits thereof. I think if we do that, we'll be able to set a much clearer picture going forward. So this is my general overview of it.
Okay, Mike. So before I go back to Prof, let me ask you this question, follow-up question on this. Um, Looking at the second of GDP that the finance minister is projecting, pension funds and a few other things, the cocoa bills and all those ones, how does that position us in the eyes of the investing public?
The investor public is already deflated. And there are a lot of people who are looking for different avenues to put their money. I mean, you have calls every now and then, people looking for advice where to place their money. People have resorted to buying FX. And that is how come last year, I mean, we realized that our city was nosediving for a very long time. We need to get this um, haircut DDEDP out of the way very quickly. Because you see, the more it's in the face of investors, the more we create a certain level of uncertainty. Mind you, we had said earlier on that there will be no haircuts, and then we saw haircuts. We had said that all the things that we said we're not going to do in the investment world has happened. Okay, people have lost money, people have lost investments, and people are looking for other areas to put their money. So even though these engagements continue, and we're also hoping that the international investors, the negotiation going on with the international investors will also to be also to end by the end of the year. The earlier we get this out of the way, the better. Because the more you speak about renegotiating haircut, doing a DDEP1, DDEP2, or DDEP3, that uncertainty makes it very difficult for people to release funds for savings and investments. So it creates a certain level of uncertainty, and people are very jittery in terms of bringing in money. But having said that, Ghana enjoys a certain level of goodwill, and so you realize that the British International Investment just 2 or 3 days ago have brought in about $50 million for SMEs and all that. goodwill can only last for some time, and we need to clean our house and put our house in order very quickly, and to demonstrate some confidence that we are doing something differently for the investor community to bring in the necessary investments that we need to make sure that we move this country forward.
Thank you, Mike. Now to you, Prof. Um, Prof,
Yes,
are you
yes, I'm
there?
here. Yes, I'm
Okay.
here.
So
I just wanted to add something small to
sure. Please go ahead.
what my
Go
senior
ahead.
colleague
Go ahead.
just
Yes.
mentioned. So, yeah, you see that, we have been to the IMF 16 times before. Now, because of the extent of economic crisis, the recent IMF supported program is one of a kind in our history. And that is why there are a number of prior actions that the country needed to undertake in order for us to have the program. The key one is the domestic debt exchange. Now, if you look at the terms of the domestic debt exchange so far, even the first round, and then the cocoa bill and the others, the memorandum, it typifies the level of crisis that we are going through. And then also, if you look at what the DDE has done to the balance sheet of the central bank, it gives you an idea of the extent of the crisis, because the level of austerity, taxes, expenditure is not enough to take Ghana out of this. And therefore, we needed to do debt restructuring. Now, if you look at it from that perspective, it should help you to project in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years what the recovery journey is going to be like. And I agree with Mike that fine, Ghana enjoys a certain goodwill. There's no doubt about that. But I think that in terms of the level of investment that we actually need in order to reach our growth potential, we are way behind, far behind. And that is problematic. Now, if you look at the government's own economic strategy, the government doesn't have the fiscal space to implement it. The government doesn't. If you look at the first program that the government announced in response to COVID-19, what they call Ghana Care Obatampa program, the financing of that program was costed to be around 100 billion cedis, and the government could only provide 30%. And the 70% was expected to come from private sector. Now, so what that tells you is that government is not in a position to finance its own economic strategy. You will need the private sector. You will need a banking sector. You will need a central bank. Now, if you look at what the domestic debt testing has done to the balance sheet of households, to the private sector, banks, non-bank financial institutions, and the central bank, it constrains us as a country to finance our own growth and domesticate the growth dividend here. If it happens that way, then it means that you have to look excessively to foreign investment. And that is only if once you do that, also, it means that growth will be recorded here, but growth will not be resident here. So the FDIs will come, but there's an exit point. So you will see from Bank of Ghana's data that our trade balance is positive. Theoretically, once your trade balance, in other words, your import is lower than your export, theoretically, that should translate to the strengthening of your local currency. But that is not happening. And the reason that is not happening is because the services and income account, which reflects the dominant nature of foreign capital and all of that, is hugely negative. And therefore, we end up with a negative balance of payment position. And that is why the city comes under cumulative pressure. Of course, we've seen that the run on the city that we saw last year, especially in October, has gone down considerably. But it's also because the economy, we have not released all the drivers of the economy. So you are not honoring payments essentially to critical sectors of the economy, arrears to contractors, independent power producers. We have suspended coupon payment on our external debt and all of that. So all of that is helping you momentarily to see some stability in your foreign exchange market. But is that sustainable? Because you cannot keep the economy in suspense like this for the foreseeable future. And that is why I'm saying that the signal, we should interpret it well, but we need to rethink that we can never grow and we will never see economic transformation and inclusive productivity growth through the approach that we have adopted under this IMF supported program. We need to rethink about the whole process. Other than that, yes, we will see macroeconomic stability, but bear in mind Macroeconomic stability is not an end in itself. It's only a means to an end. It's never pursued anywhere in the world as an end in itself. Macroeconomic stability is like fresh air, great, as our vice president once said, but it's only a means to an end. If you see macroeconomic stability consistently for a long period of time, then on the strength of that, you can talk about the economic transformation and inclusive growth. That is the next phase we need to move on to. But we can't get there with this kind of fiscal strategy we are implementing. No.
Thank you, Prof. If I heard you correctly earlier on in your first submission, you were saying that we are not yet turning the corner as per what the finance minister assured the whole nation, given the indicators you produce. Are we not turning the corner anytime soon? And when do you envisage we can do this?
I think that given the level of crisis and what the domestic debt exchange has done, even to Bank of Ghana, my real concern is the balance sheet of the central bank and then also households. We have not been able to restore confidence fully in our economy. Pensioners, individual bond holders, and the rest of them. So if all these things are hanging, and because we are not honoring our obligations across the board, and also there's a slowdown in terms of port traffic, right? And you put all of that together to conclude that we have turned the corner is problematic. We all agree with the minister government that yes, we've seen some relative stability, but we are still a long way. I think it would conclusively it may take us more than 1 year. The reason I'm saying that it will take us more than 1 year is that some of the fiscal consolidation measures are now going through the transmission mechanism through the system. We are not done with the domestic debt exchange yet, as Mr. Kobina said. Again, from the external perspective, we are not done. Even though the government is saying that by the end of this year they will conclude on that, it looks more to me that it may travel into next year. And remember that the IMF supported program, the financing gap under the program is $15 billion. The IMF, with their name on the program, is only providing $3 billion. And the World Bank is giving us about $1.6 billion. The African Development Bank will give us some grant and all of that. But we expect that the bulk of the program net financing will come from external debt restructuring. And from there, we are expecting more than $10 billion in debt relief or a combination of that and then fresh funding from our external bilateral partners. It's risk from that level. And once that risk crystallizes, it's going to affect our ability to recover quite quickly. Why am I saying so? So you look at the external bilateral debt is $5.4 billion. Now, even if they write off all of that, and I'm expecting that perhaps we will have to call on our external bilateral to commit to fresh funding in addition to their existing commitment to us in terms of debt. Then again, when you look at the Eurobond market, we are looking at the total Eurobond available, eligible for restructuring, around $14.6 billion. The question is, how far can we go in asking them to take a haircut beyond 30%, beyond 40%? So there is some level of uncertainty there. Of course, I agree with Mr. Kobna. Ghana enjoys some goodwill, even with the IMF. If you see Ghana is like a poster boy or whatever, and all of that. So Ghana, the name sells across the international space. But look at it this way. In the case of Chad, when they were restructuring their debt, they didn't get expressed in present value terms debt relief that much. In fact, Glencore, one of the key investors in the case of Chad, rather pegged their relief to the world oil price. If you look at what happened in the case of Zambia, you could also see that it worked more in terms of reprofiling, extending the maturity and all of that. So if you look at it from that horizon, there is risk. Now, when you come home and you realize that because government did not make sufficient progress with the domestic exchange, and there was real risk that Ghana may not be able to attain debt sustainability, we then use the balance sheet of the central bank as a balancing item. So the central bank is now taking a deeper haircut than what the average investor so far in the domestic market has taken. And the haircut on the principal alone is 50%. Now, bear this in mind. In our part of the world, even in the advanced countries, their central banks do more than just policy. They are also developmental. So what this has done to the central bank balance sheet is that it constrains their developmental capacity to support the economy. Because as a lender of last resort, their balance sheet is negative. Okay, the balance sheet is negative. So, for instance, assuming Bank of Ghana had not stepped in, of course, we disagree with the extent of their exposure. If the central bank had not stepped in from last year, the regime would have collapsed when they lost market access internationally and they were priced out of the domestic market in terms of the medium to the long term. And assuming the central bank didn't have the balance sheet, how would they do that? Okay, so for us, the central bank, the way we assess our central bank is more than just being policy solvent. We expect them to also come to our aid, and that is why the framers of the law, the Bank of Ghana Act, had included a provision that allows the central bank to finance the budget deficit to the tune of 5% of government previous year's total revenue. Is because we see the central bank more than just being policy solvent, more than just doing policy, monetary policy, just more than regulation. But what this has done right now is to incapacitate them in that particular space. It undermines confidence overall in the economy. It undermines confidence in terms of how individual banks, universal banks will see the central bank. Of course, maybe in our country, it is not desirable to speak the truth and the rest of them. But again, even in terms of our relationship with our partners, correspondent banking, and the rest of them, big ticket import, export, and the rest of them, when the central bank is exposed like this, it has implications in terms of big ticket transactions that investors and others would want to commit to the country.
Thank you, Prof. So the other argument from the other people is that Bank of Ghana itself or the central bank may not necessarily be a profit-making institution.
If you look
And
at the
that's due
profit
to
Bank
its
of Ghana has
losses.
been making, you know
Sorry?
what, my brother? If you look at the profit Bank of Ghana has been making in the last 4 or 5 years,
Yes,
they are competing actively with the universal banks.
absolutely.
You check the profit they've been making relative to the size of the economy and compare that to the Bank of England, compare that to other countries. Okay. So Bank of Ghana can make profit or loss in a normal course of business and the
Uh-huh.
rest of it. But what we have seen here is unusual.
So, Prof, the question then is, within the context
So can I
of
come in?
what we are facing currently, could Bank of Ghana not have financed governments?
And then Prof, to add to that, am I on, please?
Yes, please go ahead. Yes.
Yeah. To add to that, from the whole scenario, would you say that we've used monetary policy to solve problems caused by the fiscal policy?
That's exactly what we have done. That is exactly what we have done. Monetary policy has been used as a broom to sweep the mess created by fiscal policy. And that's why Bank of Ghana had a difficult decision to make, either to keep to their operational independence and respect the law that set them up, or to set that aside and save the regime and the economy from getting into full crisis.
But Prof, you'd notice that we have a law, the Fiscal Responsibility Act. The law is very clear. So, for how long are we going to wait to see this law abused blatantly like this?
As we have seen in many instances, our laws are observed more in breach than in compliance. We have the beautiful laws and all of that. I'm not sure we have the desire to comply with them consistently. Even when we passed the Fiscal Responsibility Act 2018-2019, we didn't respect it. We didn't keep to the 5% threshold. If you look at the diff inclusively, if you add energy sector and the financial sector cleanup, we're doing more than 7% from 2018-2019, even before COVID came. The fiscal vulnerabilities were clear. Okay, so all of this should lend to a certain national conversation about how we structure the central bank and other key national institutions so that they don't become subordinate to the political class, to the political economy. That is a political capture, and it's not helpful.
Mike, your views on the Bank of Ghana issues?
It's scary. I mean, we have cited other countries where similar things have happened, but then you realize that the economy is much more robust. But the situation where you have a negative net worth as a central bank, and your government itself is under IMF bailout. Who builds out who builds out who? because then it means that we will need some kind of recapitalization by the central bank. And so that is my point about doing something very unconventional to make sure that we quadruple the revenue that we have, to rebuild the kind of resources that we need in this country. Because at the rate at which we are going, it's like we are doing business as usual. And business as usual is not going to take us out of this conundrum that we find ourselves. We need to begin to look at the real sectors. Where do we pump money? We have cocoa processes sitting out there. They do all the nice chocolates, but we know that they have to be revamped. They don't need anything more than $80 million to do that. And if they did that, and we had a very good comprehensive marketing strategy, we should be able to move our processed cocoa outside the country and earn more foreign exchange. Okay, if we are be able to develop rice farms, we encourage those private sector people who are trying to do rice in this country, and we're able to cut our rice import bills. Okay, that would significantly reduce what we call it, reduce expenditure or the foreign exchange that we use in importing this. Because it's not a good sign, because then the thing is that if your central bank has a negative net worth and we also under IMF, we have all these restrictions, how are we going to generate the excess income to be able to shore up this deficit?
Yeah.
It's not helpful. I mean, so we need to relook at the economy and say, where can we actually do some minimal investments and have some quantum effect? Okay, so if it is integrated our minimum money we want to do, let us be serious and do it. If it is cocoa processing, we want to process and make sure that we tap into the chocolate market. Like I'm saying, if we have only 10% of the chocolate market, that is $12 billion. That is 4 times what IMF is giving us. So why are we not doing those interventions that will give us that quantum leap? Okay, but yet we want to do all the nice things. We want to do the overheads. We want people to go to school free of charge. Even in boarding schools, we are paying for them. We are doing all the interventions, nice things, but we don't have the money to support it. Okay, and the more you create these things, like Prof has said, as at the first quarter of this year, a lot of the corresponding banks had shut their doors. The banks in Ghana had to put up cash to be able to do imports. If your LC has to be confirmed, you have to actually set up cash out there in your account, your external account, for them to be able to confirm your LC, because every financial institution in Ghana was deemed to be risky because of our credit rating. Okay, so it creates difficulty for the private sector. It creates difficulty for anybody who is into any import-export arrangement, and it creates difficulty for the financial market. Okay, so we need to do. It cannot be business as usual. If it's business as usual, it's going to take us more than 5 years to recover. Okay, so if you want to really turn to the corner, where we are at the ground level now. I mean, so we need to do something that will really give us that part. And I don't see it in this statement.
Thank you, Mike. A few months ago, Synergy did a research on the lithium and its impact. So my question is, would new resources such as the lithium, although you did claim that we don't have the leverage of it, will new resources, fine, such as the lithium, like the oil that we're exploring, will new additions help in our case?
It does, but the thing is that we cannot use lithium in this raw form is nothing compared to lithium converted to battery or other products that can the end product. The end product is always the end game. It's always the game changer. Okay, so you can discover new resources and all that, but there's the value addition. So I think that our focus should really be on value addition. What minimal investments can we make? What kind of partnership can we strike to go into this rather than selling these things off? On the ground and keeping it there, we should rather look for partnerships that will help us do the value addition to get to do the necessary value chain and get to the end finished product where we can have quantum of it. Because look, if you look at cocoa again in its raw, the beans, it's nothing compared to, it's about 10 times, 15, 20 times, if it is processed. So why are we not focusing on the processing side of things? So yes, lithium is great, but what are we going to do? What kind of partnership are we going to strike? Are we going to give it out like we've given out bauxite to other people, gold, and exporting it in its raw form? Why can't we begin to focus on the value addition, things that will give us a quantum leap? So yeah, that's why we did that paper to draw attention to policy makers that look, we have discovered lithium is great, and that is where we are going. We are having all these electronic cars and all that. And they're all based on batteries. They're all trying on batteries. So we have to look at that end of the market. And those are the kind of partnerships we have to begin to strike.
Oh,
Hello.
hello,
Hello,
Mike. I
yes, we
think
can
you
hear
got
you.
off a little. Yes, Prof. Yes, Prof. Your views. Before I ask some questions, and then we'll ask people to ask
Yes,
questions.
look,
Prof, your views.
I agree 100% with Mr. Corbin. You know what? The world thrives on margins. You can only get margins when you add value. And these ones requires targeted policy with a certain intention. And this will require that we put the common good ahead of personal political interest. So that the targeted policies, we must not look at it in terms of which businesses it will benefit, which political affiliation or whatever. No, we have to be intentional. And if we had done that, and we even said that every year or every 4 years, we are targeting certain critical sectors of the economy, and we want to create millionaires, billionaires. We want to make sure that we are taking maybe 10 businesses from that particular subsector, put them on the national map, at the regional level, at the global level. You will see the impact that will make. If you look at our growth potential, it will come largely from agriculture, agribusiness, agro-processing. And by once you focus on that also, you would also reduce your food inflation. Because the biggest problem right now in Ghana is food inflation. And then if you look at household expenditure disaggregation, we spend more than 42% of our disposable income on food. So once food inflation is very high, the impact is very high. The impact is very, very strong on Ghanaians. And I'm sure if you look at the report from the World Bank in terms of the number of people who have fallen into poverty, as we speak right now, more than 7 million Ghanaians, right, are multidimensionally poor. That is not acceptable. So whatever recovery anybody is thinking about, whatever recovery government is talking about, whatever corner that has been turned, must respond to these development outcomes, must respond to these challenges, must be able to lift millions of Ghanaians out of poverty, must be able to narrow the inequality, must be able to put food affordable. If you look at the number of Ghanaians who are food insecure, it's rising every day. And that is not helpful. If you and you can actually target this in addition to what Mr. Corbina said. If you look at Africa in 2015, our net food import was $35 billion. This is projected to reach $110 billion by 2025. This is market. This data is an opportunity. This is not a challenge to run away from. So in other words, we have more hungry mouths in Africa to feed than any other continent. And that is why Russia, Ukraine, all of them are developing and transforming the agriculture and agribusiness, agro-processing, and exporting to Africa. Because that net food import is profit, is revenue for them. And they are creating employment for their people. And we are just importing. Anytime we import, we are only exporting jobs to those countries where we are importing from. And in exchange, we are importing their unemployment into our country. So beyond the general policies, as Mr. Kobna said, beyond the general policies, we need targeted intervention. And those targets, because we don't have a lot of money, the limited money that we have, we must invest them in the critical areas where it can generate higher output with higher multiplier effects. So if you don't have money and you have a certain amount of money, you're asking yourself, where should I deploy these funds such that I can get the maximum multiplier effect so that the economy can turn around quite quickly? And as you can see, the priority always is the next election. And therefore, these things may not be an agenda item or even an AOB on the political arena for those who matter in this space, because it's about spending the areas where it draws you closer to the power. And that is not helpful. This is what we've done to account ourselves over the years.
Thank you, Prof. Prof, in a nutshell, Mike, this is the last question before I open the space up for people to ask questions. What is the implication of the implication? We've heard you a lot of things. What does it portend for us? I mean, in a nutshell, before I open up the space for questions. Prof and Mike, please. Yes. Prof, yes, Prof. Your views. Before I ask some questions, and then we'll ask people to ask
Yes,
questions.
look,
Prof, your views.
I agree 100% with Mr. Corbin. You know what? The world thrives on margins. you can only get margins when you add value. And these ones requires targeted policy with a certain intention. And this will require that we put the common good ahead of personal political interest. So that the targeted policies, we must not look at it in terms of which businesses it will benefit, which political affiliation or whatever. No, we have to be intentional. And if we had done that, and we even said that every year or every 4 years, we are targeting certain critical sectors of the economy, and we want to create millionaires, billionaires. We want to make sure that we are taking maybe 10 businesses from that particular subsector, put them on the national map, at the regional level, at the global level. You will see the impact that will make. If you look at our growth potential, it will come largely from agriculture, agribusiness, agro-processing. And once you focus on that also, you would also reduce your food inflation. Because the biggest problem right now in Ghana is food inflation. And then if you look at household expenditure disaggregation, we spend more than 42% of our disposable income on food. So once food inflation is very high, the impact is very high. The impact is very, very strong on Ghanaians. And I'm sure if you look at the report from the World Bank in terms of the number of people who have fallen into poverty, as we speak right now, more than 7 million Ghanaians, right, are multidimensionally poor. That is not acceptable. So whatever recovery anybody is thinking about, whatever recovery government is talking about, whatever corner that has been turned, must respond to these development outcomes, must respond to these challenges, must be able to lift millions of Ghanaians out of poverty, must be able to narrow the inequality, must be able to put food affordable. If you look at the number of Ghanaians who are food insecure, it's rising every day. And that is not helpful. And you can actually target this in addition to what Mr. Kobina said. If you look at Africa, in 2015, our net food import was $35 billion. This is projected to reach $110 billion by 2025. This is market. This data is an opportunity. This is not a challenge to run away from. So in other words, we have more hungry mouths in Africa to feed than any other continent. And that is why Russia, Ukraine, all of them are developing and transforming the agriculture and agribusiness, agro-processing, and exporting to Africa. Because that net food import is profit, is revenue for them. And they are creating employment for their people. And we are just importing. Anytime we import, we are only exporting jobs to those countries where we are importing from. And in exchange, we are importing their unemployment into our country. So beyond the general policies, as Mr. Kobna said, beyond the general policies, we need targeted intervention. And those targets, because we don't have a lot of money, the limited money that we have, we must invest them in the critical areas where it can generate higher output with higher multiplier effects. So if you don't have money and you have a certain amount of money, you're asking yourself, where should I deploy these funds such that I can get the maximum multiplier effect so that the economy can turn around quite quickly? And as you can see, the priority always is the next election. And therefore, these things may not be an agenda item or even an AOB on the political arena for those who matter in this space, because it's about spending the areas where it draws you closer to the power. And that is not helpful. This is what we've done to account ourselves over the
years. Thank you, Prof. Prof, in a nutshell, Mike, this is the last question before I open the space up for people to ask questions. What is the implication of the implication? We've heard you a lot of things. What does it portend for us? I mean, in a nutshell, before I open up the space for questions. Prof and Mike, please.
Okay. From me, it tells me that, yes, with the IMF-supported program, there's an admission that, yes, we've seen some stability.
Prof, in a nutshell, Mike, this is the last question before I open the space up for people to ask questions. What is the implication of the implication? We've heard you a lot of things. What does it portend for us? I mean, in a nutshell, before I open up the space for questions. Prof and Mike, please.
Okay. From me, it tells me that, yes, with the IMF-supported program, there's an admission that, yes, we've seen some stability, which is good. We all cherish that, but we are still a long way from where we want to be. And also, you can see that the government has run out of options, clearly. So there isn't really new ideas necessarily in the mid-year review. Of course, government could run away with by saying that it's just a mid-year review, and therefore, if there are any major policy initiatives that they want to deploy, we should look forward to the substantive budget in November, latest by November 17th or so, 2023. So perhaps there isn't much that we can run with from the media review. Is an update to also tell us how the economy has performed this year and then the IMF program. But beyond that, I think we should also bear in mind that because next year is an election year, there is that also presents some level of risk and could actually derail whatever progress that we are making in the first year of implementation. And the basis of this is also that we've seen that before. The 16th IMF program from April 3rd, 2015 to April 2019, because the of 2016 also happened within that same period, we actually used the 2016 election to reverse all the gains that we made in the first year of implementation of the IMF supported program or the 16th IMF supported program. So when we're done with the 2016 election, effectively the program had been derailed, thrown off board. So to bring it back, we needed to ask for extension. And that is how come the 16th IMF program traveled for 4 years beyond the usual 3 years. So we need to look at how we manage our affairs, the fiscal side, the fiscal discipline, and all of that as we go into the 2024 election. And in so doing, we need to watch what kind of interventions government will be putting in place from now to 2024. If those interventions are not the areas that would generate maximum multiplier, then you know that the economy would take another further dive before we think about recovery again after the 2024 election. Thank you.
Mike, your views?
Yeah, I think that it's a budget which just basically says that we should manage our expectations. In view of all the tests being reduced downwards, we need to manage our expectations. I think we need to be a bit more prudent when it comes to our cost management strategies, both as a country and as individual businesses, and to look at other innovative ways of increasing the revenue, because the balance sheet has two sides: your income and expenditure. So if you cannot improve on your income side, you have to look at your expenditure and cut your quota according to your size. So I think that in all spheres of our economy, that is the direction that has been set with this media review. That we should manage our expectations. We should begin to continually review our policies and the things that we are doing to see how best we can have that quantum jump, both as a government and as private sector institutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you very much for your. So now I saw a hand, Nana. Nana raised the hand to talk. Nana, so you have been given permission to talk, please. Hello, Nana. Can you ask your questions, Nana? Yes, I'm connecting you, Nana.
Yeah, good morning, my viewers and listeners.
Please kindly mention your name and where you're coming from.
Yeah, my name is Nana Kwesi Osei-Bonsu, and I'm talking from the United States in Columbus.
Can you ask your questions, Nana? Yes, I'm connecting you, Nana.
Yeah, good morning, my viewers and listeners.
Please kindly mention your name and where you're coming from.
Yeah, my name is Nana Kwesi Osei-Bonsu, and I'm talking from the United States in Columbus. I wanted to ask a question on the platform: if the government should enforce the New Land Act 1036, going to have a positive impact on the national economy? And that's my question. And I would like the listeners to contribute on that.
Okay. Sorry. Actually, yes. Land is not my area. I only have 1 or 2 plots of land. And I've not really looked at the act to understand its implications. So it's not my area. It's not something so I don't want to speculate in that area. I'm very sorry. Forgive me. Yeah.
Mike, can you help with that? Mike, any more questions? Or Prof, do you want to share another perspective? People are very engaged. I can also see here the Ghana Stock Exchange. On here, I see a lot of you who are here. Please, thanks for joining us on this. We are grateful. Any more questions?
Yeah, Asamoah, I just wanted to say that land is not my area per se, but I mean, I think that
Okay.
any law that tries to liberate the kind of land regime that we have and makes it available or flexible for investors to be able to easily acquire land in large portions definitely will help will drive investor confidence, because there are a lot of people who come into this country who want land, and being able to get aggregate of land because of the nature of the land ownership that we have, it becomes a challenge. So I mean, any law that is passed that makes maybe government has a chunk of land, or we have a number of large areas that can be given to investors for them to be able to um, develop, maybe have the whole of the front plains or wherever that people can come and do agricultural value chain without any hitches. I think that would definitely help. I mean, the investor community. Yeah.
And Mike, what should we expect in November when the government come back to us with a new budget? What should we expect?
A little about that. Yeah. So we need to take another look at our tax environment.
Yeah.
Hello. We need
Go
to
ahead,
take
Prof. Go ahead.
we need to take another look at our taxes. There are too many taxes. The burden is unbearable. If the public sector cannot be the job creation capacity of the economy, and that will come from private sector, then let's understand the business model of the private sector, and let our tax strategy mirror that business model. We need to engage. We need to listen to the private sector businesses. In fact, the strength of any economy is linked to its private sector and businesses all over the world. And that is why governments have shifted from managing businesses essentially to creating the enabling environment. But beyond that, if they deem it fit to partner private sector businesses in making sure that they create a viable private sector, they will not hesitate in doing that. And I think the way we have configured our tax strategy, tax environment is anti-growth, is anti-businesses. And with that, there is no way you can make progress. Let me give you an example. You know that some businesses in Ghana are complaining because they are facing keen competition from Togo. As we speak right now, quite a number of Ghanaians cross the Ghana-Togo border to go and import things from Togo and bring it to Ghana, and they are still able to sell it cheaper than if they had imported it through our port system here. And it's simply because of the level of taxes. Even when you look at the ports and you look at layers of taxes that we load on imported items, sometimes we deceive ourselves that, oh, we do this so that we will not be imported and the rest of them. But the point is that more than 70% of business input costs in this country is imported. Okay, so that is just at the port alone. Just look at the level of taxes. So in Togo, it's cheaper for them to import maybe oil from, let's say, Malaysia, and add a few value addition or whatever to it and export it to Ghana. And it's still cheaper than if they were producing the oil in Ghana here, or if they were importing it directly from Malaysia to Ghana. So the taxes are just too many. There's no way we can tax our way out of poverty. So that is something I think government should look at. And specifically, is to look at consumption-based taxes. There are too many of them. So I was expecting in the media review that the government will respond to this, but it didn't happen. I'm hoping that in the substantive budget, we will merge the standard VAT rate with the straight levies. The standard VAT rate is 15%. The straight levies is 6%. In all circumstances, the straight levies looks almost like VAT. So let's merge them. So and peg it at below 18%. Effectively, the incidence of our VAT, if you add the straight levies and the cascading effect, is more than 20%. We are looking at something around 21.9% or a little more than that. This is too much. That itself is counterproductive. If your standard VAT rate is more than 17%, any additional increase in that standard VAT rate is counterproductive. And it worsens inequality and poverty. And there are too many indirect tax handles. If your tax strata is heavily driven by indirect tax handles, that largely is not good for poverty reduction. It's not good for narrow inequality. Those are the things that I think we should look at. And then also perhaps if you make the standard rate with the VAT standard rate, the straight levies, certainly there will be some revenue shortfall. We can offset that through greater administrative and compliance measures and give the necessary political will backing GRA with their e-VAT invoicing and digitization of tax records and all of that. You will see and reduce contact hours or contact opportunities between tax officials and then taxpayers. Once you deploy greater digitization and reduce the human interface, you are also able to minimize the connivance that happens between tax officials and taxpayers that leads to lower invoicing or tax to the state. So we need to look at all of that. We want to grow, but that growth should not leave so many people behind. We want growth recovery that pulls everybody along. That growth that is job rich, that creates jobs along those areas. And we have to be intentional. Beyond broad fiscal policies, we have to be intentional with targeted policies in the intensive labor subsectors of the economy, agriculture, tourism, and the rest of them, that can engineer growth that has higher employment, income, and output multiplier. That is the way we need to go.
Thank you. Mike, your views on your expectations for the next budget in November?
I think we lost Mike. But Wanda.
I also want to speak. Yes, Wanda, can you make your contributions? Okay. Wanda, are you on?
Hello, Wanda.
Hello, okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Wanda. Ask your question, please.
All right. My name is Wanda Gojo. I'm actually speaking right now from Wessel Small.
Yes, we can hear you, Wanda. Ask your question, please.
All right. My name is Wanda Gojo. I'm actually speaking right now from Wessel Small enclave. I am a young person who actually believes that if we do well in this country, then of course we have to find ways and means to actually empower our young people. Let me ask, how our governments continually position themselves to make sure that they empower young people to go into entrepreneurship, okay, practical entrepreneurship. This will solve the problem of any nation. Let me tell you one thing. There's this company just behind Wessel Small called Sunda. Is it Sunda also? I don't know if any of you live around this place, but the number of young people these companies employ alone is so serious. So I just have problems with government continually having problems with industrialization. Of course, Prof said it. We want to do all the best thing. We want to build all the infrastructure. We want to have the best exchanges, but things that would actually bring in money to help us build do these beautiful things, we are not committed to doing them. So what are the problems? What are the problems? You see all the venture capital sending money to Kenya and Nigeria. And these small countries, Rwanda, the Eastern African countries are all taking up the money. What are government doing to encourage entrepreneurship and to encourage private sectors to actually build these factories and promote this indigenous, industrialization down here so that young people can have opportunities for us? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wanda. Thank you very much for your contribution. Very, very insightful. Enoch, I can see Enoch want to speak. You have your hands up. Enoch, do you want to have a suggestion?
Thank you very much, Mr. Samoa. Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, I can hear you.
Yes, yeah. I'm joining in from Nana Krum, that is behind Ashalebotre School Junction in Greater Accra. I wanted some small perspectives about the losses declared by the central bank for last year. I wanted to find out not only in Ghana but elsewhere. We are hearing that central banks
I can hardly hear
making
Enoch.
losses.
Can you all hear him?
I wanted perspective on whether it really matters and why are central banks making losses. Thank you.
Okay. So Enoch's question is he wants to understand why Bank of Ghana made the losses that they made last year, and that other central banks are also making losses. So yeah. Okay. So
over to you.
Yeah, Enoch. Central banks can make losses. They can also make profits. So in their normal course of operation, the level of losses can raise a concern the level can raise a concern. And then also the source of that loss can also raise a concern. And that is where you see the marginality, or that's where you see the difference. So if you look at Bank of England, they've booked losses that they are calling on the Treasury to redeem because of an arrangement they have made in how they supported the economy through quantitative easing, asset purchasing at the time when interest rates were low, and now they are reversing it at a rate that is higher than that, and then also in terms of the valuation effect, is causing them to book losses. Great, but come to Ghana, okay, and you will see that the losses that we have booked on the balance sheet of the central bank is largely as a result of the domestic debt exchange. It's largely as a result of government's inability to honor its obligations to the central bank. That is different from what you see in other jurisdictions also. Of course, largely we could say that government hardly pay down their debt and all of that. But you can see the magnitude of what is happening here because the end game is not the same. The end game is not the same. Okay. And the reason the losses on the balance sheet of the central bank is that unusual is because the domestic debt exchange or the debt restructuring we had set to do as a prior action in getting the IMF supported program. The first round that we did in the domestic market, government didn't get exactly what they wanted. So if you put everything together, you will see that there's risk in we restoring debt sustainability by 2028. And we had said that long ago. And because of that, they then decided to load the rest of the haircut on the balance sheet of the central bank. And that is again problematic. I'll give you an example and why ours we should be concerned. When the IMF was advising us that we should restructure our debt, then the IMF said that their debt, our indebtedness to the IMF and that of the World Bank and other multilateral institutions were to be exempted. And our total indebtedness to the multilateral institutions came up to $8.8 billion as at the end of 2022. So the $8.8 billion out of the $30.5 billion external debt had to be excluded. And their reason was that the IMF, the World Bank, and the others were lenders of last resort. And therefore, you should not impair the balance sheet. In other words, you don't mess up the balance sheet of the lender of last resort. So that was the explanation they used to exclude multilateral debt. But then when it came to Ghana, the case of Ghana and the central bank, in Ghana, our central bank is also the lender of last resort. So what countries would do is to do everything possible to make sure that the balance sheet of the central bank is not impaired because they are the lender of last resort. So why you will see that in the case of UK, they are asking the treasury to cough money because of the losses the central bank had booked as a result of the quantitative easing. That their balance sheet is not impaired. Can you imagine if the Bank of England throws its hands up into the air and says that, look, we are so exposed, we need to be recapitalized and all of that? Can you imagine the uncertainty that would throw into the economy and the global economy? And can you imagine if the IMF also accept their debt to be restructured and therefore their balance sheet is impaired and the rest? The IMF and the World Bank, they decided to protect their balance sheet as the lender of last resort. They don't want their balance sheet to be impaired. But the central bank is also a bank of last resort. And that is why we should have been a bit mindful in how we apply the domestic debt exchange terms to the central bank without necessarily compromising the ability of the central bank to have its going concern. That is the point that we are making. And remember that as a developing country, our central bank does more than just policy and regulation. As a developing country, the central bank also takes on a certain developmental perspective. And that is why the Bank of Ghana Act, by law, allows the central bank to finance the deficit to the tune of 5% of government previous year's tax revenue or total revenue. It's because the central bank is more than just being policy solvent. But as we have it right now, we have incapacitated the central bank and limited the ability to support developmental activities. Because the central bank now is in the need of a bailout arrangement. And as Mr. Kobina said, probably from a government that is already in a bailout arrangement from the IMF. So if the central bank balance sheet is impaired like this, they will call on the government. Does the government have the money? We don't have the money. In fact, we are exposed. It undermines confidence in our financial system overall. It undermines confidence in how the central bank would also carry itself in the next couple of years. It has implication for correspondent banking. It has implication for how the outside world will relate to us. We can issue all the statement that it will not affect us and all of that, but this is a huge loss. The total asset of the central bank far exceed its total. The total liabilities of the central bank far exceed its total asset. Their equity is hugely negative. If it had been a private bank, maybe they would have lost their license.
That's a good one, Prof. As always. If there are no more questions, ladies and gentlemen, I will kindly want to bring this to a close. Unless there's a question for Prof. Prof has been so gracious with his time. We said we're going to do this 1 hour. We started at 1:14 and we are way past that. If there are no more questions, I believe that they said there are two things.
Yeah.
If the theme is well understood, then people don't ask questions, or people are confused for which they cannot ask questions. But in this case, I think with Prof on our side, we are all very much aligned and have understood the issues very well. So
I
on
wanted
that
to.
note, unless Prof you want to share some in the last words,
Oh, I think from my end,
please go ahead.
we still need to make some sacrifices. We need to be moderate with our expectations, and also we need to, there are some crises that doesn't discriminate between party A and party B. We need to get to the point where we bury our political differences and
Yes.
begin to have a national conversation that preserves certain or national institutions. I think what we have done to the central bank, maybe we may not understand the full effect, but we have set a very bad precedent. So we need to have a way of insulating certain national institutions from political interference, from political capture, because what has happened to the central bank is unusual. And I don't think, in fact, I don't think anybody working at the Bank of Ghana feels particularly happy about this. It has implication for morale. It has implication for confidence in our economy. So I think we need to have some national conversation around how do we preserve and insulate the central bank from development like this going forward. Not only that, another key national institutions.
Sure, Prof. That's a challenge you've thrown to us. As always, graphic business will pick it up and we'll set the platform for people to come and have a national dialogue on this issue you've mentioned. On this note, on behalf of the Managing Director, Graphic Communications Group, the editor, Graphic, Mr. Tuyate, and the management staff of Graphic, I wish to thank you all for coming. That is what we are for. We set the agenda and we give the platform for people to share ideas, to educate our audiences. As always, and I've always emphasized this point every now and then, as editor for Graphic Business, ours is to set the business agenda because we are also a business. What affects other business affects us. And so we are in the business of providing solutions for the nation. And we've been doing this for the past 73 years, which means that we are still relevant to the needs of our audiences and listeners. On this note, I want to thank you all for coming. And trust us, Prof, will organize a national dialogue on this banking issue. And then, of course, the last bit is that this is what we've started with the Twitter. So every time will engage the attention of all Ghanaians, we'll create this platform for all of us to discuss and chat solutions for our country. On this note, I wish to thank you for for coming and making this a very interesting topic. Thank you. I can see
Okay, so editor graphic wants to speak.
I can see. Sorry, editor graphic want to speak. Okay, editor graphic, please. Uh, let me invite him to speak, please. Editor graphic, sir. We are waiting for you.
Hello. Hello.
Yes, we can hear you, sir.
Hello. Yeah, Mr. Why thank
Yes,
you
sir, we
very
can hear
much.
you, sir.
But
Go
I
ahead.
am to our speaker, Professor Godwin,
And charts solutions for our country.
For more news, please visit our website graphic.com.gh or follow us on Facebook at Daily Graphic and on YouTube and Twitter at GraphicGH.
Subscribe now.